I used to think life had a rhythm you could trust. Wake up, coffee, the same commute, the same jokes at work, dinner at 7, a laugh or two before bed, and then sleep. That rhythm was comforting, predictable, almost like a shield. But lately, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, not exactly, but the air around her had changed, subtle and imperceptible, like the faint hum of a fridge you only notice when the room is quiet. She would brush past me in the mornings with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed the way her fingers lingered on her phone for just a second longer than usual before locking it, the little pauses when I asked a question that should have been simple. "Nothing," she'd say, almost too quickly, and I'd nod, forcing myself to believe her. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe stress at work, or just a bad night's sleep was making me hyper-aware, paranoid even. But the seed of doubt was planted, and it wouldn't let go. There were small shifts in our daily routine that I couldn't ignore. Dinner conversations became truncated, almost perfunctory. She laughed less at my jokes, and when she did, it felt delayed, as if she were remembering the punchline after the moment had passed. I tried to chalk it up to exhaustion, telling myself people change moods, that life isn't static. Still, my chest tightened in that way that only comes when something is wrong, when instinct fights with reason. I started noticing things I wouldn't have before, the way she sometimes left the room to take a call without saying who it was, the faint smile she'd wear when she came back, and how quickly she'd slip back into her usual routine, as if nothing had happened. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was just a colleague at work, an old friend calling at odd hours. But why did it make my stomach churn so badly, even when I tried to rationalize it? Evenings were the hardest. I would sit across from her at the table, fork in hand, watching the shadows play across her face from the dim lamp above. She'd talk about her day in the same tone she always had, but there was a carefulness in her words now, a precision I hadn't noticed before. She was polite, kind even, but something was missing. That spark, the effortless connection we'd had dulled just enough to be noticeable, and when it's noticeable, it's impossible to ignore. I caught myself checking her phone once, though I quickly put the idea aside before it fully formed. That would be crossing a line. Trust mattered. We'd always agreed that trust was everything, and I had clung to that principle, telling myself that my imagination was the problem. But the tiny signs persisted, adding up in quiet ways. A laugh that seemed delayed. A whispered text that disappeared before I could see. A glance that lingered too long on her own reflection. The cumulative effect was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a question I couldn't answer. Work became a strange distraction. I found myself staring out of office windows, thinking about nothing and everything at once. My mind circled back to her every time a message pinged on my phone, every time I imagined her in another space I wasn't a part of. It wasn't suspicion exactly, it was unease, subtle, creeping, the kind that infiltrates your thoughts when the world feels slightly askew. I tried to shake it off. I went for a run, I listened to podcasts, I busied myself with errands. But the feeling clung, like a shadow in peripheral vision, noticed only when I thought I was alone. Even in our apartment, the small routines started to feel different. The way she brewed her coffee in the morning, humming under her breath, the way she folded laundry without noticing me, the subtle tilt of her head when she spoke, it was all familiar yet slightly alien. I found myself questioning everything, my memory, my perception, even my own sanity. Was I overreacting? Was I making mountains out of molehills? I wanted to tell myself yes, I wanted to relax into the rhythm of our life as I had before. But deep down, a knot of anxiety had formed, tightening every time I observed these tiny, unsettling deviations from normal. Sleep didn't help either. Lying beside her, I'd watch her drift off, smooth and effortless, and my chest would tighten with an unspoken fear. Was she hiding something? Or was I just projecting, allowing my mind to construct a reality that wasn't real? Every creak of the floorboards, every muffled laugh from her phone, every glance at the door made my mind race. I tried to focus on her face, the features I had memorized over years, the curve of her jaw, the way her hair fell across her forehead, But even these small certainties seemed fragile, uncertain. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I couldn't, not without proof, not without risking everything on a suspicion that might be wrong. Instead, I maintained the routine: coffee at 7, breakfast together, work, dinner, television, bed. But I noticed everything. Every word, every pause, every look. I catalogued them mentally, storing the anomalies for later, for when the truth, whatever it was, revealed itself. And as I drifted into restless sleep night after night, I realized that the ordinary life I had relied on was already starting to crumble under the weight of questions I couldn't answer. Something had changed, though I wasn't sure what. And in the quiet moments before dawn, when the apartment was still and the city outside whispered in distant hums, I understood that the story I had known, the story of us, of our life, was already diverging from the narrative I had believed in. A subtle unease had crept into our world, small and imperceptible at first, but persistent. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. It started with small, almost trivial things, forgotten plans, little lies that didn't make sense. At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she really had double-booked herself, or maybe she genuinely forgot that we were supposed to meet for dinner. But as the days passed, the inconsistencies began to form patterns I couldn't ignore. One Thursday evening, she promised she would meet me at our favorite cafe after work. I arrived 20 minutes early, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone. Minutes stretched into an hour. When she finally showed up, she was flustered, cheeks flushed as if she had been running. "Sorry, I got held up," she said, voice casual, but her eyes darted around nervously. I didn't press her for details, but the unease lodged itself deeper in my chest. The way she avoided my gaze, the hurried movements, it all seemed just a little off. Then came the hidden phone. I never touched it, never looked, but the way she instinctively reached for it whenever I entered the room made my skin crawl. A message would appear on the screen and she would snap the phone shut so fast I could barely catch a glimpse of it. And when she spoke, there was that slight defensiveness, the kind that made me doubt whether I had the right to ask about it. I told myself repeatedly that curiosity could destroy trust, that I shouldn't jump to conclusions. Yet I couldn't help noticing, mentally filing away every evasive gesture. Even at home, the anomalies multiplied. She started leaving the room whenever a call came in, claiming it was work, but the quick, almost rehearsed way she would end the conversation before I could hear anything, the way she sometimes typed responses with her phone angled away, it all added to the unease. I noticed how she would sometimes laugh softly at something on the screen and then tuck it into her pocket, as if hiding it. These moments, fleeting as they were, etched themselves into my mind. Patterns that didn't add up gnawed at me. She would go out to run errands, but return later than she said, clothes slightly different than when she left, hair tousled in ways that suggested she'd been elsewhere. I began keeping quiet observations, noting times, places, and behaviors without letting them spill into confrontation. It became a private ledger of suspicion, a map of invisible cracks in the life we built. I was careful to maintain normalcy, to smile and chat as if nothing was amiss, but inside, a tension was growing, tightening around my ribs like a vice. Then there was Alex. He was my oldest friend, the one who knew me better than anyone. One evening, after she left for what she claimed was a late meeting, Alex pulled me aside. "Man, I don't know if you've noticed, but something's wrong. You seem tense. And it's not just you, she's acting different too." He studied my face, eyes sharp. "You know I'd tell you if it were nothing. But seriously, keep your eyes open. Trust your instincts." I nodded, smiling weakly, but his words echoed long after he left. I had tried to dismiss the discomfort as paranoia, but hearing someone else notice it, someone who didn't benefit from my anxieties, added weight to my doubts. It wasn't just my imagination anymore. The sense of unease I'd felt for weeks was now validated externally, and it both terrified and empowered me. The more I observed, the more I noticed subtle signs of secrecy. The way she would close her laptop abruptly when I entered the room, the carefully timed bathroom breaks when a message arrived, the soft sighs that accompanied whispered conversations I couldn't hear. And yet, each sign was small, almost innocent if I wanted to rationalize it. But accumulated over days, they began to create a narrative I couldn't ignore. There were moments when I almost confronted her, almost asked the questions that would change everything. But fear held me back, not just fear of what she might say, but fear of confirming a truth I wasn't ready to face. I found myself vacillating between doubt and hope, between suspicion and trust, a pendulum swinging violently inside me. Each day became a careful navigation, a mental exercise in observation and restraint. I started analyzing the rhythms of her life, noting where the gaps were. Times she said she was busy, calls she wouldn't answer, places she suddenly wanted to go alone. It was exhausting, watching, calculating, imagining scenarios that I both feared and needed to know. Sleep became restless, nights long, filled with imagined conversations and whispered confessions that might never come. And still, she remained unaware, or pretended to. She smiled, laughed, cooked dinner, asked about my day. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but I was acutely aware of the subtle tremors beneath, the shifting patterns that made my mind hyper-alert. The dissonance between what I saw and what I felt was maddening, like hearing music slightly out of tune, familiar yet wrong. Alex's warning replayed in my head constantly. Keep your eyes open. Trust your instincts. I did, obsessively, jotting mental notes, cataloging every inconsistency. Every forgotten plan, every hidden message, every evasive glance became part of a growing map of unease. I felt trapped in a delicate balance, living the life I knew while quietly piecing together the evidence of a reality I feared might be true. By the end of that week, I could no longer ignore the tension that had settled in our home. It was a quiet presence, unspoken but omnipresent, like a shadow cast by a sun just out of reach. I kept up appearances, smiled at her jokes, held her hand at the dinner table, but the weight of what might be brewing beneath the surface made every interaction a calculated move in a game I hadn't asked to play. I didn't know what would happen next, but I felt certain of one thing: the ordinary life we had shared was already shifting, subtly but unmistakably. And as I lay awake that night, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, I realized that the warning signs I had been seeing were only the first tremors of a storm I could no longer avoid. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of day that feels ordinary enough that you don't expect your world to shift with one small discovery. I had been at work later than usual, running through reports that seemed endless, the hum of the office like a white noise I barely noticed. When I got home, the apartment was quiet, dimly lit by the fading light through the blinds. She wasn't there. She had left early, claiming she had some errands to run. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice, but a subtle unease nudged at the back of my mind. I set my bag down and noticed her phone on the kitchen counter. It wasn't unusual for her to leave it there when she went out, but today something made me glance at it, just a flicker of curiosity I tried to dismiss immediately. Her phone vibrated softly, a notification lighting up the screen. I didn't mean to look, not really, but my eyes caught it, a message from someone named Asterisk. Star. The text preview was brief, almost innocuous, but the way it was worded sent a chill through me. Asterisk. Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you. Asterisk. My heart stuttered. I stared at the phone as if it were a stranger, my mind racing to rationalize it. Maybe it was a misread, a playful message to a friend, something harmless. But the tone, it didn't match anything I'd ever seen between her and her friends. I forced myself to take a deep breath and step back, trying to suppress the spike of panic in my chest. Still, my pulse thumped in my ears, loud enough that I could almost hear it over the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I replayed every interaction I'd had with her that week. The hurried exits, the sudden errands, the hidden messages, the nervous laughter at nothing. Could it all be coincidence? My mind grasped for explanations, anything to explain away the gnawing dread. I told myself, maybe she's helping a friend, maybe there's a secret project, maybe I'm overreacting. But even as I muttered those words to myself, a tiny, stubborn voice whispered, "You know this isn't normal." The discovery stayed with me, a shadow that followed me through the rest of the evening. I cooked dinner mechanically, the smell of onions and garlic failing to settle my stomach. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound outside the window, felt amplified, like the world was conspiring to remind me of the unknown. I debated whether to call her, text her, ask her outright, but fear stopped me. Not fear of confrontation exactly, but fear of what I would confirm if I did. Instead, I decided to watch. Not from a distance, not like a detective in a noir film, but quietly, carefully. I needed to know more before I forced the issue, before I tore open the fragile balance of our lives. I watched her patterns, her phone habits, the way she spoke when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Every detail became a potential clue. Every smile that lingered a second too long, every whispered call that ended abruptly, every sudden change of plans, it all began to form a lattice of suspicion that I couldn't ignore. Sleep that night was restless. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, replaying the message in my head. Asterisk. Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you. Asterisk over and over. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself I had misread the situation. Maybe she was being silly with a friend, maybe it was a work contact, maybe it wasn't what it seemed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the foundations of our life together had already cracked, quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface. I started noticing the way her phone would light up during dinner or when she thought I was out of earshot. The tone of her messages, brief, coded, careful, made my stomach twist. She was hiding something, I knew it, even if I didn't yet understand the full scope. And the worst part wasn't the uncertainty, it was the paralysis that came with it. I couldn't confront her yet. I couldn't risk the truth without understanding the whole picture. So I waited. I watched. Every day became a careful calculation, a silent observation game where every gesture and every word carried hidden meaning. I kept a mental record: who called, when she went out, the little changes in tone or expression. I wasn't snooping, not in the way I told myself, but I was listening, noticing, piecing together fragments of a puzzle I didn't yet want to solve fully. And the more I observed, the more my mind spiraled. Was this the beginning of the end? Could I have missed the signs all along, blind in love and trust? The internal dialogue was relentless, one side desperate for proof, the other terrified of what that proof would do to my life. I realized something terrifying in that still, lonely moment. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was reality creeping up, soft and quiet, waiting for me to confront it. By the time she returned that night, I had already rehearsed what I wouldn't say. I greeted her with a calm I didn't feel, made small talk, kept the conversation light. Her laughter felt sharper than usual. Her eyes flicked to her phone more times than I could count, and I noticed the subtle way she checked the room as if anticipating something, or someone. And all I could do was watch, my heart heavy, my mind teetering between disbelief and certainty. That night, as I lay awake once more, I realized I was standing at the first turning point. The moment of truth had arrived, subtle but undeniable. I hadn't confronted her, hadn't demanded explanations, hadn't unraveled the full story, but the evidence was there. The seed of betrayal had been planted in my hands, and the rest of the story was waiting to grow, whether I was ready or not. The quiet fear that had been a whisper through my life now roared just beneath the surface. I understood something profound in the hollow hours before sleep. Once trust is questioned, the world you thought you knew becomes fragile, and the only path forward is careful observation, patience, and the terrifying anticipation of what you are about to discover. The morning after I saw the message, I woke up feeling hollow, but determined to act normal. I made coffee, toasted the bread, and carried it to the table as if nothing had changed. She was there, hair tousled from sleep, pajamas slightly rumpled, and she smiled at me, the way she always had in the mornings. My chest tightened, and I forced a small smile back. It was hard to reconcile the warmth of that simple gesture with the gnawing suspicion in my mind. "Morning," she said, voice soft and casual. Nothing unusual. Nothing I could point to. But I noticed it, the hesitation before her words, the brief pause where her gaze flicked toward the kitchen counter, as if she were remembering something she shouldn't have. My stomach sank, But I swallowed it down, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. We ate breakfast together quietly. I watched her pour the coffee, noticing the slight tremor in her hand that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it was my imagination. I remembered past mornings like this, laughing over spilled coffee, talking about plans for the weekend, feeling the comfort of routine, and I desperately wanted to cling to those memories, to convince myself that everything was fine. But the thought of the message lingered, impossible to ignore. As we talked, I tested the waters carefully, asking small questions about her day ahead. "Any meetings today?" I asked lightly. She replied with the usual efficiency, listing them off, but I caught the subtle flicker of unease in her eyes. She shifted in her seat, glanced at the door, as if calculating her timing. The behavior was so minor, so fleeting, that anyone else might miss it, but I noticed. I forced myself to nod, to keep the conversation mundane, to preserve the illusion of normalcy. Throughout the day, my mind oscillated between denial and rationalization. Maybe she was genuinely busy. Maybe she was under stress at work. Maybe my imagination had amplified something harmless. I wanted so badly to believe in that version of reality, the life we had built together, the laughter we shared, the moments when I felt truly at peace with her. But the proof I had glimpsed, small as it was, kept poking at the edges of my rationality, refusing to be quieted. Later, she called me from the grocery store. "Hey, just picking up a few things," she said. Her tone was casual, friendly, warm, but again there was that subtle hesitation, a tiny catch in her voice when she mentioned how long she would be. I wanted to ask more, to probe, but something held me back. Fear, maybe? Fear of confirmation, fear of shattering the delicate balance of our life, fear of losing her entirely if the truth was as I suspected. I replayed memories in my mind, as though by recalling the good times I could silence the anxiety. The weekend we spent laughing on the beach, the night we stayed up talking about our dreams, the quiet moments at home when her head rested on my shoulder, I clung to them like lifeboats. I wanted to tell myself those memories mattered more than one suspicious message, that our shared history could outweigh a fleeting deception. But even as I tried to rationalize, the tension in my chest refused to ease. When she returned that evening, I greeted her with a neutral warmth, pretending the message hadn't existed. She smiled back, more relaxed than she had been in days, but I noticed how her eyes lingered briefly on her bag, then darted away, almost guiltily. My mind catalogued it, stored it like a breadcrumb, even as I fought to suppress the impulse to confront her. I told myself patience was necessary, that I needed to gather more evidence before acting, even though every second of restraint felt like torture. As we ate dinner, I observed her subtly, her gestures, her tone, the way she reached for the wine glass just a fraction faster than usual. Nothing overt, nothing that could be accused or confronted. But the hints were there, like whispers in a silent room, teasing the truth. I found myself torn between relief and despair. Relief that nothing had exploded yet, despair that the calm was only superficial, a fragile mask over something I didn't fully understand. Later that night, we watched a movie on the couch. I let her lean against me, feeling the warmth of her shoulder, trying to anchor myself in the comfort of touch. I wanted to believe in it, to feel normal again. But my mind couldn't rest. Every laugh, every glance at the screen, every small gesture of affection was filtered through suspicion. I questioned everything, her intentions, my perceptions, the subtle signs I might have ignored for too long. I lay awake after she went to bed, turning over the day in my mind, calculating, analyzing, rationalizing. I told myself it could be nothing, that perhaps I was overreacting, letting fear warp my judgment. And yet, deep down, I knew the calm of the day was deceptive. I had seen the first sign, and the way she moved, spoke, and interacted with the world carried traces of something unspoken, something hidden. The more I tried to convince myself that I was imagining it, the more I noticed inconsistencies. Small gestures, fleeting expressions, subtle hesitations, each one a thread pulling me toward a truth I wasn't ready to confront. I understood, in that quiet hour before sleep, that denial could only carry me so far. The choice was mine: confront the possibility of betrayal or let the doubt fester, slowly eroding the life I thought I knew. And so I waited. I clung to the memories, I forced myself to smile, to interact, to act normal. But the tension was palpable, a shadow over every shared meal, every laugh, every conversation. I realized I was walking a fine line between hope and suspicion, between love and fear, between holding on and letting go. The emotional weight pressed down on me, relentless, reminding me that once trust begins to waver, even subtly, the familiar world can feel alien. By the time I drifted into restless sleep, I understood that I was trapped in a strange limbo, part denial, part suspicion, entirely consumed by the question I couldn't yet ask: how much of the life I thought I knew was real, and how much was already unraveling beneath my feet? The unease I had been carrying for weeks had become unbearable, and I realized I could no longer rely on instincts or fleeting signs. I needed to know. I told myself it wasn't about distrust, it was about understanding the reality of our life together. So I began searching, quietly, carefully, tracing digital footprints and social threads that I had ignored before, convincing myself that knowledge, even painful, was better than uncertainty. It started with social media. I looked for subtle changes: photos she hadn't shared with me, posts with comments that seemed oddly intimate, tags I hadn't noticed. At first, everything appeared ordinary: friends chatting, selfies, mundane updates. But then I found it, a photo she had liked, one I hadn't seen before, of a place I didn't recognize. The caption was casual, but the comments beneath it were flirtatious, playful, knowing, messages that implied more than friendship. My chest tightened as I scrolled through them, the rhythm of the notifications like a drumbeat echoing in my mind, reminding me that what I feared was no longer just suspicion. Then I moved to our mutual friends, those who had always been close. I asked subtle questions, casual inquiries that I hoped would seem harmless. I watched faces carefully as they responded, subtle shifts, quick glances, pauses just long enough to reveal what words wouldn't. One friend hesitated, offering an excuse about busy schedules and late nights. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it added layers to the pattern I was piecing together. The threads were converging, and the tapestry was ugly. Finally, I found it, a hidden account on her phone. She had created it carefully, as if anticipating someone would eventually look. The messages were there, messages I hadn't imagined, conversations filled with laughter, inside jokes, and flirtation. Each line was a betrayal, not physical necessarily, but intimate, emotional, a world I wasn't part of. I read them repeatedly, forcing myself to remember dates, times, words. The way she wrote to him, the ease with which she shared herself, my mind raced to compare it to what she said to me. The contrast was suffocating. The anger hit first, sharp and explosive. How could she do this? How could she maintain our life, smile at me, cook for me, and still have this other existence hidden from me? But beneath the anger, heartbreak settled in, deep and heavy. I remembered her face from earlier that week, the soft smiles, the laughter we had shared, and I wondered how much of it had been genuine. I felt like I had been living in a bubble, an illusion that was now punctured by reality. I tried to rationalize it again, as if logic could protect me. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it was harmless flirtation, an emotional escape without intent to betray. But the more I revisited the conversations, the more impossible that idea became. This wasn't fleeting, it was deliberate. It was intimate. And it had been ongoing, carefully hidden, woven around our life like a shadow. I began to catalog everything: the messages, the social media interactions, the sudden errands, the unexplained smiles. Each piece was a puzzle fragment, and when they all came together, the picture was devastating. The person I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, had been infiltrated by another presence, someone else who had become significant without my awareness. The betrayal wasn't just a moment, it was a pattern, a parallel life constructed beneath my eyes. Anger gave way to a different kind of clarity. The illusion was gone, the questions were no longer abstract. I could no longer ask myself if something was wrong, something was very wrong. The reality of her emotional affair pressed down on me, a weight I couldn't ignore. I felt a sharp ache in my chest, like a fist pressing against my ribs, each beat reminding me that trust, once fractured, cannot be easily repaired. And yet, even in the heartbreak, I noticed a strange sense of focus. The anger, the grief, the disbelief, they all sharpened my awareness. I knew that confrontation would come, but it would have to wait until I understood the full scope of the betrayal. I needed certainty, not speculation. I needed clarity, not emotion alone. And so I observed, silently recording everything in my mind, tracing patterns, calculating probabilities. The realization that she had maintained this double life, this secret emotional connection, made my mind whirl. How long had it been going on? How deep were the feelings involved? Every shared memory, every affectionate gesture, every laugh now seemed filtered through the possibility of deception. The betrayal had changed the lens through which I saw everything, and the distortion was dizzying. By the end of that night, I felt drained, hollowed out by knowledge. The apartment felt smaller, the shadows longer, the quiet heavier. I sat in the darkness, phone in hand, tracing her words, her movements, the delicate choreography of secrecy that had allowed her to live two lives at once. Anger, heartbreak, and disbelief mingled into a cocktail that left me reeling, uncertain whether to confront her immediately or continue gathering evidence. In that moment, I understood the stakes fully. This wasn't a simple lapse or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate betrayal, one that required careful consideration before I could act. And while I had pieced together the outlines of the truth, the full consequences were yet to unfold. The tension had escalated, the trust that had underpinned our life shattered, and I realized that the next steps I took would determine whether I could salvage anything, or whether the life we had built was irreparably lost. The depth of the betrayal was now undeniable. It wasn't a flicker of suspicion or a single text, it was a world hidden beneath the surface, one I had only just begun to comprehend. And in the quiet aftermath, I felt a strange mixture of grief, rage, and resolve. I had uncovered the depth. And there was no turning back. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the messages, the hidden account, the laughter I wasn't part of, and the way she had maintained an entirely separate emotional world without me. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo any longer. I had to confront her, not angrily, not hysterically, but with the weight of what I knew pressing into every word. When she came home that evening, I was waiting. The apartment felt smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She smiled when she walked in, swinging her bag carelessly over her shoulder. "Hey, you're home early," she said, casual, unaware, or pretending to be. "Sit down," I said, my voice low but steady. I gestured toward the couch. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, that flicker of something. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or confusion, before she complied. I watched her as she settled, noting every detail, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she avoided eye contact for a heartbeat longer than normal. "I need to ask you something," I began, trying to keep my tone measured. "I've noticed things, patterns. I've seen messages, interactions, and I need to understand what's going on." My stomach twisted as I spoke, but I refused to let my voice waver. I needed calm. I needed control. Her smile faltered. "Patterns? What are you talking about?" she said, voice light, teasing almost, but there was a tightness under the words. I recognized it immediately, defensiveness. "I've seen messages, accounts, things you've hidden," I said, carefully choosing each word. "I'm not accusing you blindly. I just need the truth." I leaned back, trying to read her reaction. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, a subtle tell I couldn't ignore. I don't know what you mean," she said, voice softer now, a tremor creeping in. "Maybe you're imagining things. You've been stressed, maybe it's getting to you." The excuses were quick, practiced, almost rehearsed. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to remain calm. I couldn't let her manipulations throw me off. I shook my head slowly. "I'm not imagining anything. I've seen the messages, the hidden account. I've pieced it together." I need honesty, not deflection. My words were steady, but my chest ached, heavy with the anticipation of her response. She inhaled sharply and looked away, running a hand through her hair. Look, it's complicated. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for anything to happen. I didn't know how to handle things. Her voice wavered, fragile and almost pleading. I felt the anger rise again, hot and sharp, but I suppressed it. Complicated? You call emotional betrayal complicated? I trusted you. I built my life around us. And all this while, you kept another world hidden. My voice was firmer now, echoing in the quiet apartment. She flinched slightly. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted you to find out like this. Her eyes met mine briefly, full of a mixture of fear and regret. It wasn't physical, if that's what you're thinking. I didn't know how to stop it. I swallowed the lump in my throat and exhaled slowly. Intentional or not, it's a betrayal. It doesn't matter if it wasn't physical. You shared your emotions, your time, your attention, things that belong to us, with someone else. That's not something I can ignore. I paused, letting the words settle, letting her see the gravity in my eyes. She looked away again, silent for a long moment. Then, I just felt lonely, disconnected. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought it was harmless, just talking, but I see now that it wasn't. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling, but there was no full apology, only explanation. I felt a surge of conflicting emotion, heartbreak, anger, disappointment, disbelief, all mixed with the faint, stubborn hope that maybe she could understand, maybe she could change. I forced myself to focus. I need to know one thing, I said, tone firmer. Do you want to repair this, or do you want to continue as if nothing has happened? She hesitated, eyes wide, biting her lip. I don't know, she admitted finally, voice barely above a whisper. I love you, but I don't know how to undo this. The words hit me like a blow. I felt my chest tighten, a wave of despair threatening to overwhelm me, but I held on to it. I needed clarity. I needed boundaries. Then this, I said slowly, each word deliberate, cannot continue without honesty. I won't allow half-truths or hidden worlds in our life. You either commit fully, with transparency, or we walk separate paths. No more shadows. She looked at me, searching my face for a crack in my resolve, but there was none. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator, the subtle creak of the floorboards, and our shared, tense breathing. For the first time, she seemed to understand that I was serious, that I would not bend, that I would not ignore the betrayal, and that the future depended on her response. I felt the release of emotion in a strange, almost painful way. Anger and hurt were still there, sharp and raw, but there was also a strange catharsis in asserting my boundaries, in refusing to let deceit dictate my life. She shifted in her seat, tears brimming, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had loved, the one capable of remorse and reflection, peeking through the mask of defensiveness and excuses. I didn't know what would happen next. Whether she would choose honesty or continue in secrecy, whether we could rebuild or not, it was unclear. But I had drawn the line. I had spoken. And in that confrontation, I realized something profound. I could feel the pain, acknowledge the betrayal, and still maintain my integrity. That alone was a beginning. The morning after the confrontation, I felt hollow, as if the world had shifted a fraction and I was no longer fully anchored in it. Our apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage where every glance and gesture carried weight. I expected things to be quieter between us, but the tension had spilled out beyond these walls in ways I hadn't anticipated. It started with small whispers, texts, subtle comments from friends who had noticed the strain in my voice or the quiet tightness in her tone. I tried to ignore it at first, focusing on work, on routine, on anything that would keep my mind from unraveling. But inevitably the truth leaked, in bits and pieces, like water through a cracked pipe. Alex was the first to bring it up, though indirectly. We met for coffee, and I could see the worry etched into his face before he even spoke. "I heard something happened," he said cautiously, stirring his cup as if the motion could steady his words. "I don't want to pry, but are you okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "I'll be fine. Just a lot to process." He gave me a look that was part sympathy, part suspicion, and I realized that even the people who cared about me were beginning to sense the rupture. Not knowing the full story made them cautious, hesitant to take sides, yet drawn to the tension in ways that left me feeling exposed. It didn't take long for other friends to notice. Casual messages that once flowed freely became clipped or awkward. Invitations subtly disappeared. Conversations that used to be light and teasing now contained pauses, unspoken judgments, questions hidden between words. I understood, almost painfully, that the betrayal I had endured was no longer confined to the private corners of our lives. It was radiating outward, affecting those who had once been neutral, those who had once existed in my world without bias. Family visits brought their own complications. My parents noticed the quiet strain during dinner, the way I avoided certain topics, the careful calibration of my emotions. They asked if everything was okay, their concern palpable, and I couldn't lie convincingly. Half-truths felt like betrayal in their own right, and so I remained silent, letting the tension speak for me. Their worry was genuine, but it added to my isolation. I was carrying this weight largely alone, unable to share the full depth without shattering their sense of trust in her, in us, in life as I had presented it. Her friends reacted differently. Some distanced themselves subtly, excuses about being busy or needing space. Others remained present but tentative, their smiles hesitant, their conversations filtered through an awareness they hadn't had before. And then there were a few who sided quietly, defending her with careful words, suggesting that maybe I was overreacting, that I was misunderstanding, that perhaps the truth was more nuanced than I could see. Each reaction was a small sting, a reminder that betrayal doesn't just affect the two people involved, it ripples outward, touching the lives of everyone connected to them, rewriting social landscapes in ways impossible to fully predict. I felt isolated, caught in a sphere of scrutiny I hadn't anticipated. Every encounter carried weight, every question or comment filtered through the lens of what had happened. And yet, amid the judgment and subtle distancing, there were unexpected pockets of support. Alex remained steady, a quiet presence reminding me that someone understood, that I was not entirely alone. Even a few distant colleagues who had no stake in my personal life offered small gestures, listening without judgment, a text checking in, an offer of distraction. Their presence felt fragile but vital, like fragile glass catching light in a dark room. I began to see how the betrayal had fractured not just our marriage, but the social ecosystem around us. Conversations became careful, gatherings tense, casual interactions now loaded with implication. People I had considered neutral were suddenly forced into positions of subtle judgment, forced to choose sides or remain silent, their perceptions forever altered. And in watching them navigate the fallout, I realized that trust, once broken, does not just collapse in private. It ripples outward, reshaping relationships, altering the way people perceive both the betrayer and the betrayed. Even my professional life wasn't untouched. I noticed colleagues glancing with subtle curiosity, whispers in hallways, eyes lingering in ways that made me feel exposed. The burden of carrying private heartbreak in public spaces was exhausting. Every email, every meeting, every smile now carried a tension I hadn't experienced before. I realized that betrayal doesn't remain confined to bedrooms or living rooms. It infiltrates every space you inhabit, leaving traces that others sense even when they don't know the specifics. Despite the scrutiny, despite the isolation, there was a strange clarity in the chaos. I saw clearly who remained steadfast, who wavered, and who had always been peripheral but now revealed their priorities. I understood, painfully, that the external fallout would be long-lasting, that social landscapes once taken for granted could never be entirely restored to what they had been. But I also understood that while judgment and whispers were inevitable, the only space I could control, the one that mattered most, was my own integrity, my own responses, my own choices in navigating the aftermath. By the end of that week, the apartment felt heavier than ever. Her presence was no longer comforting, and the world outside felt precarious, like walking on thin ice. I knew that every conversation, every encounter, every casual glance carried layers of meaning I hadn't considered before. Betrayal, I realized, isn't just an emotional wound, it's a force that reshapes the world around it, altering connections, friendships, and perceptions in subtle but enduring ways. And as I sat alone that evening, listening to the distant hum of the city, I understood that the fallout would continue, that I would continue to feel the ripple effects in ways I couldn't yet anticipate. But I also understood that I could survive this, navigate it, and emerge with my own boundaries intact. The betrayal had widened my world, not just inwardly but outwardly, and now I had to decide how to move through it without losing myself entirely. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been before. No phone vibrations, no background noise of work calls or errands. Just silence, the kind that presses against your chest and forces thoughts to surface you've been avoiding. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor, letting the emptiness seep in, not to numb myself, but to examine it, to confront what had been simmering beneath the surface. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to think not about her, not about the betrayal, but about me. What had I allowed? Where had I neglected my own instincts? I realized that trust, once freely given, had become a weight I carried blindly. I replayed my choices, the moments when I ignored small signs, rationalized away uneasy feelings, and tried to convince myself that love alone was enough. And now, faced with the reality of deception, I had to confront the question I had been putting off: what do I want for myself moving forward? I considered boundaries, hard, unyielding ones that would protect me from further harm. Could I forgive her? Could I rebuild something that had already been fractured so deeply? Or would forgiveness be a slow, self-inflicted punishment, a concession that left me tethered to pain? I weighed the options carefully, turning each over in my mind, like a coin reflecting light, revealing both shadow and shine. Revenge crossed my thoughts too, fleetingly. The idea was tempting, visceral, satisfying in a momentary, primitive way. I imagined confrontation scenes where her hidden world would be exposed to friends, where I could reclaim some sense of power or justice. But even as the thought flared, it fizzled under the weight of rationality. Revenge wouldn't repair the damage to me, it wouldn't restore trust or self-worth. It was a temporary heat that would leave ashes behind. Instead, I tried to practice emotional detachment. I watched myself as if I were observing a stranger navigating a storm. My anger, my heartbreak, my anxiety, I catalogued them, separated them into compartments, examined the patterns of how they rose and fell. It was painful and exhausting, but necessary. I realized that detachment wasn't about coldness. It was about regaining agency. About recognizing that my life, my choices, and my dignity were mine to reclaim, regardless of her actions. I thought about independence, small steps at first. Making decisions without consulting her, reclaiming spaces in my routine that had been subtly seeded over the years. Cooking for one, going to the gym alone, meeting friends without hesitation, reading a book without distraction. Each act, mundane though it seemed, became an anchor, a reminder that my existence was not contingent on her approval or attention. In the solitude, I also reflected on self-worth. Betrayal is corrosive because it convinces you that your value is negotiable, that you are disposable. I fought against that lie. I remembered moments when I had felt proud of myself, confident, capable. I thought of successes, small victories, and the relationships where I had been fully seen and appreciated. I held those memories close, using them as a foundation to rebuild, piece by piece, my sense of self. Forgiveness remained a complex question. Could I ever forgive her? Perhaps, but not yet. And if I did, it wouldn't be for her sake. It would be for me, a conscious choice to release the weight of resentment so I could move forward without it dragging me down. I acknowledged that I could walk away now, or later, or even try to rebuild a connection with clear eyes and hardened boundaries. The choice wasn't about morality. It was about survival, clarity, and the preservation of my integrity. I experimented with emotional exercises, small meditations, journaling, visualizing the life I wanted independent of her. I imagined mornings where I woke up without anxiety, nights where I slept without the gnawing tension of uncertainty. I pictured conversations where honesty was mutual, where laughter wasn't tainted by doubt. These mental exercises weren't escape, they were rehearsal. Preparation for a life I could shape intentionally, not passively endure. And yet, even amid this self-reflection, a tension remained. The question of what to do next loomed, quiet but insistent. Do I confront her again, demand a fuller reckoning? Do I walk away immediately, severing ties completely? Or do I wait, gather more clarity, and then act with full knowledge of the consequences? Each option carried risk, loss, and the weight of irreversible choices. I realized that the only certainty I had was my own agency. No one could make me forgive, stay, or leave. No one could determine the boundaries I would uphold or the life I would build moving forward. That power was mine alone, and it felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. By the end of the evening, I felt a fragile strength forming, a quiet awareness that the storm had changed me, yes, but had not broken me. I had begun to reclaim myself, to disentangle my identity from the betrayal, and to prepare mentally and emotionally for the next step. What that step would be, confrontation, separation, or cautious rebuilding, remained uncertain, but I was no longer paralyzed by fear or doubt. For the first time in weeks, I slept with a measure of calm, knowing that whatever came next, I had begun to define my life on my terms. The betrayal had revealed the fragility of trust, but it had also illuminated the strength of self-awareness, the power of choice, and the necessity of boundaries. The path forward was mine to shape, and that alone was a small, hard-won victory. I had spent nights replaying the choices in my mind, weighing every possible outcome, every subtle consequence. The quiet reflection, the small experiments in independence, the reassessment of boundaries, it all led to a single, unavoidable conclusion. I couldn't continue as if nothing had happened. I couldn't compromise my sense of self, my dignity, or the life I had fought to build. The turning point had come, and I knew what I had to do. That evening, I waited until she returned. The apartment smelled faintly of dinner she had left prepared, a gesture that would have once brought warmth, now only highlighted the emptiness of trust betrayed. She walked in, smiling lightly, a casual, "Hey," that felt foreign to me. I didn't return the smile. I didn't soften. I had rehearsed these words for hours, each syllable measured, each pause intentional. "Sit down," I said, voice calm, steady, carrying the weight of finality. She hesitated, sensing the difference immediately, then complied. The air between us was heavy, thick with unspoken truths. "I've thought about everything," I began, deliberately slow. "About the betrayal, the deception, the lies hidden in plain sight. About the world you created without me. I've realized something important. I can't share my life with someone who doesn't honor my trust, my presence, or my worth." My hands rested on my knees still, but my mind raced with clarity. Her smile faltered, replaced by the flicker of defensiveness I had seen before. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Her voice wavered, uncertain, tinged with fear. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm saying that I'm leaving. Not because I want revenge, not because I hate you, but because I respect myself enough to walk away from what's harmful." I held her gaze steadily, refusing to be swayed by guilt, pleading, or excuses. "I've given thought to forgiveness, reconciliation, patience, but I've realized that my dignity isn't negotiable. I've reached my limit." She looked at me, eyes wide, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and desperation flickering across her face. "You can't just leave. We can fix this." "I can." "No," I interrupted, voice firm, unwavering. "This isn't about convenience. It's about boundaries. I've tried to understand, to rationalize, to forgive in my heart, but the truth is clear. I cannot coexist in a life where trust is fractured this deeply. I need to reclaim myself fully, without compromise, without half-truths." She sank into the couch, hands trembling slightly, words failing her. The apartment, once familiar and safe, felt suspended in that moment, a crucible for the gravity of our decisions. I wasn't angry anymore, anger was fleeting, but I was resolute. My strength didn't come from domination or confrontation, it came from clarity, from owning my truth and refusing to let deception dictate my life. I paused, letting the silence fill the room, letting the reality settle. I've reflected on my worth, I continued softly though firmly. I've considered forgiveness, patience, and even second chances. But my life, my integrity, cannot wait for someone else to realize what they've lost. I choose myself. I choose honesty, boundaries, and clarity. I choose freedom from betrayal. She finally spoke, voice low, strained. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I love you. Please, please don't leave. I shook my head slowly. Love without respect and trust isn't enough. I've loved with my whole heart, and it's been enough for me to see the truth. But it's not enough for this relationship to survive. I am leaving, and I need you to accept that. For the first time, I felt a weight lift. The fear of ending, the hesitation, the endless mental replay, it all gave way to a solid, unwavering sense of agency. My decision wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a reaction. It was deliberate, grounded in reflection, fueled by clarity, and anchored in self-respect. She reached toward me, perhaps in desperation, perhaps seeking reassurance, but I stepped back gently, firmly. This is my choice, I said. I cannot compromise myself anymore. I hope one day you understand why. And with that, I packed my things, small, deliberate, mindful. I didn't rush. I didn't slam doors. I moved with quiet confidence, each action a reaffirmation of the life I was reclaiming. The apartment, once a shared space, had become a symbol of the life I was leaving behind, but also of the courage I was carrying forward. As I walked out the door, I felt a mixture of grief and liberation, heartbreak and empowerment. The air outside felt sharper, cleaner, freer than it had in months. I had chosen myself, and in that choice, I discovered an unexpected strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The betrayal had tested me, crushed me, and yet it had also illuminated my capacity to stand firm, to protect my worth, and to step into a life defined not by deceit, but by my own terms. For the first time in what felt like years, I inhaled fully, deeply, without hesitation. I had made my turning point. I was leaving the past behind, and for the first time, I truly felt the possibility of a future built on my own choices, my own boundaries, and my own dignity. The first morning after I moved out, the apartment felt impossibly quiet, yet for the first time in months, the silence wasn't oppressive, it was mine. I made coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, and sat by the window, letting sunlight spill over my hands. The world outside seemed ordinary, unchanged, yet everything inside me had shifted. I was no longer tethered to deceit or half-truths. I was free to rebuild, to rediscover, to redefine myself. The days that followed became exercises in reclaiming life. I created small routines that were entirely my own. I went for early morning runs, relishing the crisp air and the rhythmic pounding of my feet against the pavement. I cooked meals with deliberate care, savoring the process rather than rushing through it. I allowed myself to read books I had neglected, to linger on music that moved me, to explore parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of betrayal. Every small act was a reminder that I still existed, whole, capable, and unbroken. Friends reached out cautiously at first. Some had remained distant during the fallout, unsure of what to say or where to stand. But slowly, their messages became warmer, more genuine. Conversations were no longer tinged with tension or curiosity about our private life. They were about me, about my choices, about rebuilding and moving forward. Alex, in particular, became a steady presence, reminding me that support and understanding still existed in a world that had once felt isolating. I reflected often on the lessons the ordeal had taught me. Trust is fragile, yes, but so is self-delusion. I had learned to listen to my instincts, to observe without excuses, to honor my own boundaries. Love alone cannot sustain a relationship if honesty and respect are absent. I had learned that dignity is non-negotiable, that heartbreak is survivable, and that walking away doesn't always signify defeat, it can signify strength, clarity, and foresight. There were moments, of course, when the memories surfaced unbidden, the laughter, the intimate moments, the casual touches that had once felt safe. But instead of allowing them to crush me, I reframed them as part of my story, not the whole of it. They were lessons, not prisons. Painful, yes, but instructive. Each recollection strengthened my resolve rather than weakening it. I also discovered the subtle joy of independence. Decision-making no longer carried the shadow of compromise or hidden motives. I could plan my day, my week, even my future, without negotiating invisible lines or worrying about concealed agendas. The freedom was at first unnerving, then exhilarating. I felt my self-respect solidify with each choice made purely for myself. Occasionally, I reflected on what forgiveness might mean, and realized it was for me, not for her. It wasn't about absolving past wrongs or rekindling a connection. It was about releasing the lingering bitterness that could poison my own life. Forgiveness, in this sense, became a quiet liberation, a way to reclaim emotional energy that had been diverted to hurt, suspicion, and uncertainty. I began to embrace the possibility of new beginnings, not necessarily in relationships, but in life itself. Opportunities one had ignored, personal passions I had postponed, and friendships I had allowed to drift away now re-emerged, vibrant and full of potential. Every choice I made was a reclamation of the life that betrayal had threatened to steal. One evening, as I walked through the park near my apartment, the sun dipping low, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The wind brushed my face, carrying the faint scent of winter leaves, and I realized something profound. I had survived. I had felt the full weight of heartbreak, betrayal, and disillusionment, and yet here I was, intact, reflective, wiser, and stronger. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine to shape. I thought back to the moments when I had doubted myself, when I had wrestled with anger and despair, when I had feared that the betrayal had permanently altered who I was. And I realized that the truth of my journey wasn't the pain itself, it was how I had chosen to respond. The turning point had not been walking away, the turning point had been recognizing my own value, asserting my boundaries, and refusing to let deception define the limits of my life. Sitting on the bench as night settled over the city, I let the quiet stretch around me. Stars began to appear, faint at first, then gradually brighter, and I thought about trust, about love, and about the strength required to protect oneself. I knew I would carry memories of betrayal with me, but they no longer had the power to shake my foundation. I had rebuilt that foundation from scratch, and it was steady, resilient, and mine. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I understood the final lesson: life continues, and though it will sometimes bring pain, it also brings clarity, self-respect, and the freedom to define one's own path. The past would not vanish, nor should it. It had shaped me, but it no longer dictated the terms of my existence. I rose from the bench, shoulders squared, heart steady, and continued walking. The city stretched before me, alive and indifferent, full of possibilities. And in the midst of it, I felt a profound truth settle quietly in my chest. I had survived, I had learned, and I had reclaimed my life. The betrayal had ended, but my story, my life, was just beginning.